Three, two, one. So let's talk ball. Hi guys, my name is Ifelu. I'll be taking the first part of the project presentation for Neil, I, and Nazir. And as seen, the title is Let's Talk Ball. What are we talking about really? We'll be looking at the revolution of three-point shooting over the years. You'll recall that it took decades for NBA, that is the National Basketball Association, to finally adopt three-pointers, and that was in 1979. And since then, it has changed the way we see the game. It has changed the way the game is played, and we'll be looking at what has happened over the years. We're looking at the trend in three-point shooting versus the trend in two-point shooting. We'll be looking at whether teams attempt three-point shooting more at home games or at away games. We'll be looking at the correlation, if there's any, between three-point shooting and winning. We'll look at some of the title-winning teams and see if three-point shooting contributed to that. And then finally, we'll be looking at top three-point shooters in the game. So for my data set, I sourced them from two sites. The first is Basketball Reference, and then the second is Team Ranking. For the first data set, I looked at the performance over the seasons from 1979, when three-point shooting was adopted, down to 2019-2020 season. I compared the performance when it comes to three-point shooting versus two-point shooting. And then for the second set of data, I looked at the performance of each team when it comes to three-point shooting from 2003-2004 season to 2019-2020 season. The results are really quite amazing. Okay, so I'm going to combine the data analysis and findings. All right, let's go. So the visualization shows the progression of three-point attempts, and now it currently dominates the game. And we'll see that three-point attempts have been steadily increasing since the three-point line was introduced in 1979, with the exception of just 3 seasons, the 95, 96, 97. If you look at the V's, you see the abdominal growth those years, different from the general mean. What happened those years was that the line was moved a bit forward, and that's resulted in more three-point counts over that period. Remember Steve Kerr and Sid Legler, who both achieved above 50% on three-point attempts. However, in the subsequent years, while the line was moved to the normal place, the general mean continued. That is one. Then two, we'll talk about record throws. The last 5 seasons, 15 and 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, they've resulted in the most three-pointers attempted, breaking the record each year. This has contributed to the highest effective field goal percentages, and has also contributed to the highest offensive rating in the league's history. And that is amazing. And when it comes to home and away games, it appears teams don't just care, although there's a slight data in favor of away games. If we look at the adopters, of recent, Houston Rockets seems to be the biggest adopters. In the 2019-2020 season, they have attempted an average of 44.8 3-points throwing in away games and 43.9 at home games. Interestingly, in January 2019, the Rockets set a single-game NBA record by attempting a ridiculous 73 pointers, and they scored 33.3 of their attempts. Can you imagine? 70 in one game. On at home games, beginning in 2016 down to 2019, the Rockets were top of the three-point attempts in the entire division. Overall, the visualization shows that most teams attempt more 3 points throwing at away games than home games. It could be that this helps them to balance both offensive and defensive moves. And then lastly, we'll talk about the impact of sport analytics. In basic mathematics, 3 is more than 2. But you wonder why teams that don't adopt three-pointers until sport analytics came to the picture, and then they could see the data that supports the fact that it is more efficient to shoot three-pointers more than, I guess, against 2-pointers. And this has contributed to how the game is currently played. We're no more in the era of big players, the Shaq of this world. We're no more in the area. It's more of skill-based recruitment now being done, so that the players that could defend, attack, and are good at three-pointers are now being recruited.
Okay, data set. So for my part, I wanted to see if there was a correlation between shooting 3-point shots and winning games. Now, in order to do that, I decided to come up with two lists. One, look at the top 10 winning teams, and then the second list, look at the top 10 3-point shooting teams in the NBA. Well, how would you do this? I decided to go to basketballreference.com, and if you look in the expanded sections, then you're able to see the top 10 overall. You can see the overall scores to see the top 10 teams. I did this in this case, this is for 2018 to 2019. I did this for each season going back to 2010. Now, I chose 2010, which is the last 9 years, because like in Ifiolua's graph, you can see that from 2010 till now, there's been a steady increase in teams making 3-point shots. So I wanted to look at that data specifically and see. So I got the information from the expanded standings for the overall teams, copied and pasted that into Excel. I also looked at the 3-point shots made, and I ordered the list so that I can see the top 10. Took that information, put it in Excel, boom, I got the data set. And I also looked at, on the same site, in the same area, you can see who made it to the conference finals of that year and who won the championships. So I took all that information, put it in Excel, there you go. Moving on to data analysis. So now we have our wonderful data set, but we want to make it beautiful. We want to make it exciting in Tableau. So I had to put all the information in my Tableau, and I realized that it wasn't working. Tableau was not accepting my Excel sheet. So I had to play around with that. It had something to do with how I was writing the seasons, the years. So once that was fixed, I managed to get it into Tableau, and I decided to start with a dual axis graph where I was plotting both and seeing if there was any overlap. If there was an overlap, then that means there was a correlation between shooting and winning. And in this case, you can see the orange dots represent every team that made both lists. All the teams that are in the graph definitely made one list, but the orange points represented making two lists, a correlation. So I did that, and I didn't really like how it looked for each season. Yes, the information was there, but my group members pointed out in this graph, it doesn't show any information regarding the finals. But I started all over again and revamped how I was doing it, which led me to this final dashboard. As you can see, it's better to show all of the information. I can filter out from the season, let's say 2010 to 2011. I can see which teams made it to both lists in the center row. Then I can see by the pie charts whether they turn green or red, if they made it to the finals and if they won the championships. So you're able to play around with this dashboard in a more interactive, visually pleasing way, if you ask me, biased opinion. So that's how I was able to show that information, and that's how I really and truly, when I look at the dual axis graph, seeing that, it made it very clear that there was a correlation. So it's kind of, I didn't want to throw away all that work, but at the end of the day, it was helping me come to the conclusion that yes, there was a correlation before I went and tried to make something pretty that didn't even make sense. Next up, we have findings. So after reviewing all of the data, as I said, there is definitely a strong correlation between shooting 3-point baskets and winning basketball games. Now, over the years, mostly in the last 9 years, which is what I was looking at in my data analysis, more teams are getting wind of the effectiveness of shooting 3-point baskets. And that's probably thanks to data analytics. Well, with the exception of the season 2013 to 2014, you can see that in every season, the teams that made it to the finals and 5 out of 10 times won the championships all made both lists. What would I have done differently? With more time, I would have definitely wanted to see going back all the way to 1979 and seeing the list, how the list correlates from back then till now. Also, in Neil's part, we're going to be looking at top 15 3-point shooters in the league. It would have been nice to correlate which teams those players played on, when, and how they interact with my chart. So that's about it for my part. On to Neil.
Okay, project data set. All the data that I used was taken from basketballreference.com. I used two main pieces of data. First was the list of all NBA three-point leaders. That was a list of players ranked from top to bottom of how many three-pointers were made by the player in each season. And the second piece of data that I used was actually more than one single piece of data. It was the data on every single player for every single year, how many threes they made in each season. So because sometimes players change teams, there was no distinction made in this data for players that were maybe traded or by choice left a team in the middle of the season. Data analysis. So originally I was going to take a look at the top 50 three-point shooters in NBA history, but there were two issues with that. One, Tableau squishes the data too much, and two, no one can read a list of 50 players in any meaningful way. So I cut it down to the top 15. By using the top 15, I actually cut out some of the variance in my data. Because I'm only using the top 15, it takes away things such as lucky seasons, players who just got hot and they stayed hot throughout an entire season, and two, having a good player on a bad team, just being the only player who can shoot threes and therefore they're taking all the shots. The progression that I found among the players who were in the top 15 fell into two categories. One, drafted shooters, players who were chosen for their three-point ability, came in and they excelled right away. And the second was long careers, players who just played so long that they worked themselves onto the top three-point shooting list. Okay, in this project, there were two notable findings. Firstly, three-point shooting will be dominated by the new generation of players. 7 of the top 15 three-point shooters are currently still playing. And my prediction is anyone in the top 15 who's already retired is going to be pushed out or surpassed in the next 10 years. Secondly, the top three-point shooting season of all time belongs to Steph Curry. In the 2015-2016 NBA season, Steph made 402 threes. Now, to give some reference, Joe Harris is 250th in the all-time threes made list. And in over 6 seasons of playing, he's only made 616 threes over his entire career. Now, looking over this project, there are definitely some improvements that I could have made. Firstly, I would have liked to make this visualization real time. The NBA season is still currently going, and players who are even in the top 15 are currently moving up the list. And I'd like to provide more information from my visualization. The list that I have right now provides information about the three-pointers made, but I'd love if I could provide more info, like maybe a player picture and maybe some team history.
Finally, after hearing all of this, on to our recommendations. So stakeholders who we think will be interested in our data would be players. We think that players should prioritize three-point training to be more appealing candidates for, let's say, GM. The general managers would be interested in our data because when they're selecting their players, a team with strong three-point shooters amongst all of the other important skills, what they're looking for, would make for a stronger team. If everyone can shoot a three, then better the chances of winning. Next up is coaches. We think that coaches should incorporate more three-point shots into their plays because, of course, that leads to winning. Fans enjoy offensive games because they create more drama. So I think this is really good. And especially, for example, I let my cousin look at our project and he was all excited. He's like, oh, who do you think is going to win? Oh, do you have the data for this season, this finals? Like, he was well engaged. So this information is also information fun for fans. And Vegas odds makers, for sure. Who's going to make it to the finals, conference finals? Who's going to win the championships? This data would be very appealing to Vegas odds makers. And on to our conclusion.
So our project looked at three-point shootings from 4 viewpoints. We looked at three-point trends in the entire league, three-point shooting that teams do while at home versus on the road, the three-point rate a team has, its relationship to winning, and the players at the forefront of the three-point revolution. Now, three-point shooting is an important factor to NBA offenses, and the insight from our project will allow players, coaches, and general managers make informed decisions about three-point shooting. The insight that we have, shoot more threes. Now, three-point shooting is an important part of a championship winning team, but it is only one part. So remember, next time you're shooting your shot, make sure you're behind the line.